After the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, Spain was no longer a major player on the world stage, but Britain and France continued to constantly be at war, competing with each other for wealth and empire in different parts of the world. In the 1700s, things got really bad in the colonies between Britain and France. The colonists began to look beyond the Appalachian Mountains for land. The area was rich in natural resources, and the colonists wanted them. The British felt it was theirs, but so did the French. The French had a great relationship with the Native Americans who had helped them in their fur trading in the area. To protect their claim, the French built a series of forts from Lake Ontario all the way to the Ohio River. The British built their own fort in western Pennsylvania. But before the British could finish the fort, the French took it and built their own fort on their spot called Fort Duquesne. The governor of Virginia sent a militia, which is a military force made up of ordinary citizens, to drive out the French. But leading this group was no ordinary citizen. In fact, he was the most extraordinary colonist in the area, and his name was George Washington. Washington set up his own fort near Fort Duquesne, and he called it Fort Necessity. Shortly after he did, though, the French attacked it and forced George Washington and his militia to surrender to the French forces. This began an event known as the French and Indian War, where the French and Indians were on one side and the British and the colonists on the other. Once the war started, both sides tried to solicit the help of the Native Americans. Native Americans had had a great relationship with the French fur trappers in the area. In fact, many French fur trappers married Native American girls, and missionaries there had converted many of the Native Americans to Catholicism. However, the British was a whole different story. The Native Americans had a big distrust of the British, and their experiences with the British had not been good. All things being said, the Native Americans decided to help the French. The colonists tried to make a treaty with the Iroquois. The Iroquois Confederation was made up of the most powerful group of Native Americans in eastern North America. The Native Americans did not agree to support the colonists, but they did agree to remain neutral. Delegates of the colonies met at the town of Albany, New York, and they agreed to adopt a plan that had been proposed by Benjamin Franklin, the Albany Plan of Union. It called for a united colonial government that required each colonial government to give up some of their power. Not every colonial government, however, agreed to give up their power, and Franklin was bitterly disappointed. Everybody cries a union is absolutely necessary, but when they come to the manner and form of the union, they are perfectly distracted. At first, the French had a lot of success in the early parts of the war. They captured some of the British forts, and Native Americans raided colonial towns and villages. William Pitt became Prime Minister of England, and he committed more British soldiers to the war, which of course cost England more money. Pitt, however, thought that after the war, they would be able to increase taxes on the British colonies, and the British turned the tide, and eventually the British won the war, and with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the war was over. It was the dispute over the Ohio River Valley that started the French and Indian War. The war dealt a severe blow to the Native Americans. The British refused to pay the Native Americans for the use of their land, and the colonists began to settle the area. The Native Americans saw this as a threat. One Native American, Pontiac, led Native Americans against the British and the colonists. He led attacks on and killed colonial settlers. To prevent future conflicts with Native Americans, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763. The proclamation of 1763 prohibited the colonists from settling lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. The king issued this because he wanted to protect the colonists from coming into conflict with Native Americans and a future war possibly starting. Colonists, however, felt that this proclamation limited their freedom to grow, and they hated it. Deeply in debt, Britain decided to tax the colonists to help pay for the French and Indian War and for the future protection of the colonists. And thus began the major problems that caused the American Revolution.